Hello, Thrive Nation. It's all about genetics today. I've got a real expert on the show, Kashif Khan. He's written the book, The DNA Way. He started a company, The DNA Company. It's a privilege to have him on. He's transformed thousands of lives, brilliant website, great on social. Welcome to the show.
Pleasure, man. Good to be here with you.
Brilliant. I love your calling. I love how you speak about purpose in your book, and really going to put links to your book because I think it's a really good read for people to start understanding genetics, something that's so complicated. You know, I've got a few of my genetic tests here that I want to run through possibly at the end of the show, and you can sort of help me decipher things. You know, I've been in functional medicine for 17 years now, a physician for 24 years, never missed a single day's work to sickness or ill health in 24 years. So I just want to get better and better, and I think you can help me and get me stronger and stronger. But let's start with your backstory, how you got into sort of genetic testing and how you wrote this book and started the company.
First of all, I don't know how you're going to get better than never missing a day of work in 24 years. You're going to be Superman flying around the world.
Come on, make me Superman, Kashif.
So my story didn't sound like that. In fact, I missed a lot of work because of how sick I was. And that was really the big aha moment for me. Like I couldn't function. So I had 5 chronic conditions, and you being a functional medicine practitioner would appreciate that I had the opposite. I was dealing with allopathic healthcare, which was here's what your problem is called, and here's a pill you need to take. And I had 5 problems at the same time. Eczema, and the eczema was so bad I actually couldn't open my left eye. It was like sealed shut. I had psoriasis to the point where I just had bleeding knuckles all the time, horrible gut issues, depression. I couldn't get out of bed, and migraines. The migraines was the worst part. That's what would prevent me from actually working. Then I would leave the office. So all in all, I kept asking, why is this happening? Never been sick in my life. Why all of a sudden these 5 things at the same time? And I couldn't get that answer. And it was my first time understanding that they don't do that here. That's not the doctor's job. They don't figure out why. No fault of their own. It's training. They're trained on how to, diagnose and prescribe. So I started, just like most functional health journeys, researching on my own and learning about how my body actually works and where disease comes from, and even the most basic concepts like inflammation and diet and things that I haven't bothered looking into. And after a year of diving deep, I learned that there was parts of my genetic code that were entirely missing. It wasn't just missing. It's what it was. Yeah, not what version, what variant, what mutation. I just was missing some key genes that my peers weren't missing. And as an example, GSTM1 is a gene that's highly protective of the gut.
Yeah.
And so glutathionization, binding and clearing toxins, your gut does that separately from other systems in your body. And GSTM1 is a gene that instructs that process. I don't have the gene. Missing from there's a page torn out of my human instruction manual. And so when I'm working downtown with my colleagues and eating lunch out every day, and I'm thinking that it's healthy, but chemicals, pesticides, packaging, all the things that I needed to start understanding and considering were making me sick. And this was one of many things that I unraveled and unpacked. And I got to the point where I no longer had any of the conditions that I was told I have. They were all reversed. Not only that, but I was by that time tracking my biological age, and I was able to reverse it. So not only did I remove the acute problem, but I actually got healthier than when I started. I got my arthritic mother out of bed, going to the gym and training in her 70s. Started healing the people around me, and I realized, wow, the whole world needs this. And I started funding the research, and my dining room turned into a research lab, and it just went from there. And now all of a sudden we have this lab and research institute that has helped, like you said, thousands of people.
Sure. It's incredible. What a story. Now, I think it's about 22,000 genes from what I know. And do some people just have far less? I mean, is that something that you just miss, and then other people have inserted genes, or what's the variability on people not having the genes they need to?
So the 22,000 genes, most of it is noise. And this is the challenge when you're looking for genetic testing. You're reading like, we sequence 700 genes, we sequence 5,000, we sequence the entire genome. And I asked them one question: how many lives have you changed?
Yeah.
Because they don't know what it means. Data is dumb. Data is useless unless you know what question to ask and how to interpret it, which is a key word. How do I interpret this information? So what I learned is there's really only 100 genes that matter when it comes to functional health, system-based health. How do your hormones function? How do you metabolize, you know, chronic disease prevention? The big questions that we need to ask. And those genes instruct functional pathways. So they instruct the entire hormone cascade from progesterone to testosterone to estrogen, that full cascade. They instruct the full metabolic pathways. They instruct neurochemical production, binding, clearance, the full cascade as opposed to independent steps. And if you look at those 100 or so genes, you can really unpack basically any chronic condition that's out there and why it happens. We know that all the top killers are, for the most part, rooted in inflammation. The reason why we get inflammation is different, and that's what we're able to learn. So to answer your question, what I talked about with the missing gene, copy number variation is called. How many copies do I have of the gene? This happens in very few genes, but in some of the most important,
Wow.
which are around detoxification.
Yeah.
Detoxification of hormones, detoxification of chemicals, detoxification from the lungs and from the gut. And so this is where it's possible to have these. There's also something called an insertion or a deletion, which means it's not about a snip or a spelling mistake that we commonly look for. It's like there's a paragraph in this page missing, or there's an extra paragraph inserted. And so you can't read it properly and the code isn't working. So imagine genetics tells us that this spelling mistake, this one letter, the C is a T, it was supposed to be a C, is so impactful that we're going to make a decision on it. And that's all genetics looks at. What about the insertion deletions? A whole paragraph is missing, or the copy number variations. I don't even have the gene, or I have an extra copy of the gene.
Yeah.
Imagine the impact of that. So we pared it down to what really matters. And now it's like, let's look at less, but solve a lot more.
Sounds good. Give us another story, possibly of a female that you've like transformed with regards to their life. And, you know, I've been doing genetic testing myself for many, many years in the practice. And I want you to try and really help me, because I mainly do it with people that are really struggling. They've been everywhere else. They've seen like 10 different like functional medicine doctors.
Yeah.
Can't get better. We've obviously got the full myriad of all the diagnostic testing we're doing. But after reading your book and looking at it and just listening to you quite a lot more, I've almost got an inclination to do the genetic testing earlier, which is quite interesting, you know. So tell us another story, and then we'll get into sort of the very details of genetics.
So you're right on, where I think geneticists got it wrong, and they were using genetics in disease-centric thinking. I first need to know the disease, and then I'm going to use genetics to sort of personalize, right? Because research was funded from pharma, which is disease-centric. Really, what we're saying is forget about the symptoms, forget about the disease. Let's look at the systems, because those same system failures equal every chronic disease. So if you understand, here's all these jobs that my body does, from metabolizing things to making things to clearing things. If I know what job my body doesn't do well, I now know exactly what to add and remove in terms of my habits. And I know if I don't make the right choice, here's exactly the problems that could come out of it. And if I already have a problem, I can probably figure out why I got it. So that's a better way to look at genetics, is the biology. Here's all these little micro jobs. Here's how efficiently or inefficiently I do them. I now know what that means. So to wrap that all up into a story, like you said, so I actually talk about this in the book. And it's the reason we went from being a research company. We never intended to be a commercial test seller. We were meant to be a research company that just helped other healthcare companies do a better job because of our knowledge. And so we spent 3 years with 7,000 people to one by one anecdotally solve their problems, to then dump another insight into the database and keep learning, and that then powers whoever we work with. So then my niece had an anxiety attack, right? So she lives with my mom and my sister, and I got a call and they said, like, she can't breathe. We don't know what's going on. I head over there and I call my friend who's a pediatrician, and he said, yeah, that sounds like a classic anxiety attack, but it also sounds like it's over now. Like, she's resting, just let her rest. And if it happens again, let me know. So it did happen again. And this time my mom calls me frantic saying that you need to take her to the hospital because she passed out and she hit the table and we think she may have broken her leg. She can't walk.
Wow.
So yeah, so I go over there, call my pediatrician friend again. He said, yeah, this sounds again like an anxiety attack, classic symptoms. Take her to this hospital. He directed me. I went there. 8 hours of testing, blood work, x-rays, all this stuff. Canadian healthcare system is free, but it takes a long time, right? So we spent the whole day there. And at the end, what we were told was, We don't see anything, but if it happens again, let us know. And I remember this is the same thing my pediatrician friend said, and I knew what that really meant. What it really meant was if it happens again, she's getting diagnosed with an anxiety condition, and we're going to tell you what pill she has to take. And I thought, I cannot let it go to this. I have to figure out what's really going on. Meanwhile, I went to work and I didn't do anything about it. Just like I don't claim to be a superhuman. I forgot. I didn't do
Yeah.
anything. So my mom calls me again. And this time she says, in bawling with tears, your niece has run away from home. And to me, did not make any, completely out of character.
Yeah.
The sweet, innocent girl doesn't leave the home by herself by her own choice, right? And meanwhile, she's run away from home. Like, doesn't add up. So I go there and she's literally standing down the street, just standing there, not knowing what to do. And I pick her up, take her in the car, and say, what is it, bullying? Is it your school? Is it like social media? What's happening? All the usual suspects. And what I realized is she didn't know. She had no clue why she felt the way she felt. There was no driver, there was no trigger. She was just escaping that space. She was trying to get away from the feeling, and she didn't know what else to do other than leave.
Sure.
And so I then at that point stopped the car, told my office, email me her genetic report right now. And we're in the car, and I wasn't looking for anxiety. What I was looking for is what jobs does her body not do well? And how do I use that to interpret the way she's feeling? What did I see? First thing, big red flag, is her hormone cascade. So in the circadian rhythm of female hormones, the beginning of the cycle is when you have the least amount of hormones. You just finished getting rid of everything.
Yeah.
So there's almost nothing there. So her delta is much deeper. She goes into a really deep decline because of the way her genes instruct the metabolizing of hormones. She doesn't make them enough. So much deeper value. So it's already leading to mood issues, changes. And so I called my mother and said, do you remember like where she was in her cycle? And I looked at the text messages and calls, and like clockwork, they were about every month apart. She was calling me 28 days, right?
Mm.
I was like, this is tied to her cycle. And it was right at the beginning. And she told me right at the beginning, you're right. She was coincidence that it was right before her cycle started, right during that dip with no hormones. But this is 3 months in a row, but she had been in her cycle for over a year. So why now? This happened during peak COVID 2 years ago in Toronto, where we had the world's longest lockdown in the middle of the winter, and she hadn't been outside in 5 months.
Wow.
Yeah, this was Toronto reality during lockdown. She literally didn't go out for 5 months in the winter where there's already not enough sun, which meant she got zero vitamin D. Now, you mentioned there's 22,000 genes in the genome. 2,000 of them require adequate vitamin D to function properly, to express properly, to do their jobs. She was getting zero. So I looked at the genetics of her vitamin D, and there's 3 steps. Get D2 from the sun, convert it to D3. She has the worst possible gene for that. Transport that D3 to the cell. There's another gene, worst possible gene for that. Bind it and connect to the cell. She had the worst possible gene for that. So she was designed of an ancestry that was just out in the sun all day long that needed to mitigate the overexposure to sunlight. And meanwhile,
Exactly.
she hadn't been outside in 5 months, right? So why did this equal an anxiety problem? So hormones failing, this key micronutrient that drives so many biological processes also failing. So she's already teetering on the edge. Then we look at her mood and behavior. Then I started looking at the anxiety genes, and I looked at her ability to deal with dopamine. Dopamine is that chemical that allows you to feel pleasure and reward and satisfaction. And the way you experience it is you deploy it and your brain binds it. There's these receptors in your brain. DRD2 is a gene that determines how dense those receptors are. She has the least possible density. So it's very hard for her to experience pleasure. It's kind of like I can't get no satisfaction all the time, right?
Mm.
Then you have to clear the dopamine to get back to normal. She has the fastest possible clearance. It's COMT is the protein that it's called, right? Fast possible COMT. So hormones are horrible, zero vitamin D, so that's already pushing her over the edge. And she has this inability to experience pleasure and reward in a context where she hadn't been outside in 5 months and is like her whole life is just homework on the computer during COVID lockdown. That all equaled what looked like an anxiety crash. And it truly was. But she didn't have a mental health issue. She didn't have a chemical imbalance issue. She didn't have a propensity towards anxiety that needed medication, right?
Yeah.
What she had was a low exposure to sunlight. And so I gave her two things: L-theanine to boost the dopamine and make her feel happy, and a high dose vitamin D regimen. But I split the vitamin D because remember, she doesn't transport and bind it. So I didn't give it to her all at once. I gave her 3 doses during the day. The very next month, her next cycle, it didn't happen. And it has never happened since then once again.
Wow. Wow.
So
Well
now
done.
imagine. Yeah, that's it. Simple. The solution was so simple. If you look at
Mm,
the biology and if you look at the genes that instruct the biology, and you do a little bit of detective work, that anybody, like what I'm saying is not overly complex, or
mm,
anybody, what I just said. And now she would have still today have been on an anxiety pill
yeah.
2
Not
years later.
looking at the root cause and working out why she was
Yeah.
having those times. Very powerful. I mean, we saw this with COVID, just talking about vitamin D, the Somalian sort of community in Copenhagen that was living in Denmark. They
Yeah.
were not supposed to be living there. 40% of them died if they got COVID. They were under the wrong solar light. They probably
Yeah.
had the similar same genetics. They're supposed to
For
be at
sure.
the equator level. So your
Yeah.
body absolutely adapts with these types of genetic variants to make sure that you don't get too much of this UV radiation. Your skin goes dark to
Yes.
prevent that. Your binding capacity is obviously lost. And exactly what you've said, the adaptation of genes, but now you're living in the wrong place. Now that's going to
Yeah.
cause significant issues.
You have centuries and centuries and centuries of
Mm,
adaptation to an environment, and then you flip the environment on its head. Why do you think that's going to work? Right?
yeah.
And here's another thing about African population. There's a gene called ACE2, which is, and because you
Mm,
mentioned COVID, I'm going to tell you about this story. There's a gene called ACE2, which is implicit in hypertension and blood pressure flow, but it's also the gene that COVID uses to proliferate in your body and deposit its RNA into your cell. So it needs to sort of lock and
fine.
key with
Yeah.
ACE, right? And that's what makes you sick. So there's 61 locations that have been studied on this gene that are the exact SNPs that are sort of negative outcome for COVID. You're gonna die, but you're gonna get a very intense flu. So of those 61 locations, African descent people have 24 of them on average.
Mm,
So for example, Ashkenazi Jews have almost zero, right?
yeah.
Chinese people have almost zero. Um, there's some South Asians have like 5 or 10. So you can now predict how sick you're going to get using your genome and what exactly to do about it. Now that I know that it's very easy for COVID to proliferate in my body and make my cells sick, what do I need to support? I now need to go look at the defenses. Is it my mitochondria? Is it my vitamin D? Like, what are the other things that are broken so
Yeah.
that if I do get sick, God forbid, that I can fix it. So a lot of clues in your DNA that can answer a lot of questions.
Yeah, very powerful, isn't it? I mean, if you look at South Africa, 80% of people over the age of 50 have hypertension.
Yeah.
80% of people. And a lot
Wow.
of them are African descent. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, hypertension being the number one cause, etiological cause of cardiovascular disease, it's pretty much crazy in terms of what's happening. But that's phenomenal, just looking at the genes and seeing how they interplay with anxiety. But let's sort of unpack maybe COMT and dopamine. It's obviously the motivation and reward. In terms of mood and anxiety and depression, we do a lot of corporate work, Kashif. And I've never seen people burn out so much in the last 3 years. We've gone in, we're doing a lot of auditing now, using genetic testing as well for some people that have got the sort of financial means in corporate CEOs, executive teams of big banks and that here in South Africa. And so many of them are just struggling emotionally and mentally, mental ill health increasing to such a large degree. What are the most important genes that people need to test, and how influential are they with all this mental ill health going around?
So there's many genes, and the way we look at it is, so keep in mind, why is there a big wave of mental health? That in itself is a clue, meaning it before COVID it didn't exist, and now it exists. So you didn't actually have an innate problem, right? You weren't mentally ill prior to. Now all of a sudden you are. So you didn't have a problem. What you had is a shift in context, right? Your epigenetic inputs, your environment, maybe your nutrition, your lifestyle changed. So what you were exactly like what you said about a certain population moving to a different country, in one place you thrive, in another place it's your kryptonite, right? So what's going on is certain people are wired with certain superpowers. For example, my niece, when she has inability to feel pleasure, Dopamine also powers reward, which is achievement. And you only need one. You only need satisfaction from either pleasure or reward. So somebody like her that can't sense reward and clears really fast is a reward seeking person. They need more and more and more, that warrior spirit. And if you put them in a context where there isn't reward to get, go work on this project with this team and in your school, you don't get that hit that you require. She needs
Yeah.
to be doing big and bad stuff. So that context could equal depression. Put me in my regular day-to-day with that profile, you're probably going to experience depression because the world sucks. Nothing's good enough. Put me in a context where I'm struggling for money and I need to go work, I'm probably going to feel amazing with that wiring because that reward seeking behavior kicks in. That's what that person is designed for. Go do things, get it done, right? So the
So I want to
opposite also.
stop you there. So entrepreneurs probably have a COMT or DAO or MAO. What's the story with entrepreneurs that need that
Yeah,
achievement and that growth and that development?
I've spent a lot of time analyzing the brain of entrepreneurs, from billionaires to hedge fund managers to millionaires to small business. And I can now, if I have your genes, I can now predict what type of entrepreneur you should be.
You
What your
joking.
No, I can
You're
predict your
joking. Come
personality
on,
to a
Kashif. Tell
yeah.
me something true now. Come on. Come on,
if
Kashif.
if I have your DNA, I can tell you if you should be a doctor, an accountant, if you should be an entrepreneur, and then what type of entrepreneur, if you burn out, procrastinate, if you're irritable, if you can't sleep properly because your brain can't stop thinking. Your neurochemicals drive your behavior and your perception. Your genes drive those neurochemical paths, and genes don't lie. It's an instruction. It's telling your body to do something, and that's the way your body's doing it. The only difference in the outcome, again, is environment, nutrition, and lifestyle. If you happen to be taking the right supplement, or you happen to be doing the right kind of exercise. Let me give you a simple example.
No, no, I want to stop there because you said in the book that your DNA is not your destiny. So I want
Yes.
to, I want you to tell me how and what entrepreneur. I'm going to book a consultation with you, man. I got my genes. I want you to tell me what I should be doing because you're changing the world with health and wellness. But maybe you can give me some insights in terms of how to build my company, what's going to work, what's not going to work,
Yes.
what type of entrepreneur I should be, how I should build my team. I mean, these are fundamentally important questions to be able to answer.
Yeah, I'm literally next week flying to a corporation. I'm going to give you an example. You asked about an example, but I literally flying next week to this major construction company's head office to coach the entire management team of where they fit. How do you actually build this puzzle? And it's two families, two brothers, and all of their kids. So, it's like the families need to learn how to work together. So I've mapped out all of their neurology and I'm gonna go teach them, here's what you do, here's what you do. When you two people need to talk, here's how this guy perceives it, here's how this guy perceives it, like truly to that level. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So there's a phenomenon in Finland where they genetically across the board, the ethnically Finnish people have the lowest uh, gene expression of what's called BDNF, brain-derived
Yeah.
neurotrophic factor. BDNF drives neuroplasticity, your neural pathways, but it also drives mood in the way where if your BDNF is off, you tend to give things a lot of meaning. There's a lot of weight, shell shock, brain spinning, right? Lawyers letter in the mail, everybody out of the room. I got to deal with this. That type of drama queen response, right? So the Finnish people across the board are wired like this, which means they should be constantly angry, frustrated with that drama type response. Meanwhile, Finland over and over again is voted the happiest country in the world, which doesn't add up. And this is to your point, like how do you have habits that are aligned with your genome to get the best outcome? Because you can. Your genes are who you are at baseline, and now your habits will decide your net result.
Hmm.
So Finnish people have more saunas per capita than any other population in the world. Sauna is a potent upregulator of BDNF, and they do it daily. And they do it daily because if they don't feel good.
Wow.
They feel frustrated and angry, and their mood is off, and they don't want to go to work, and they can't get along with people, and so they just do it, and they don't know why they're doing it, right? It's part of their culture, but every home has a sauna, and everybody does it every day. So that's a perfect example of your genes are your hard code, but they are not your destiny if you know how to manage their expression. But that first starts with reading the code. The purpose of reading genetics isn't you have an 80% chance of Alzheimer's. That is old news, right? What it is your body doesn't do this job well. Here's the priority, red flag. You don't make BDNF properly. Now go adopt the habits to give yourself the outcome you want, right? And you may actually want the bad BDNF, by the way, because people that have bad BDNF think like this with blinders on, tunnel vision. So they make very good scientists. They make very good authors. They make very good artists because they give a lot of meaning to stuff and they can't bother with what else is going on. Like, this is what I'm focused on, right? An email from them isn't, yes, thank you. It's 2 pages. That's how they think.
Yeah.
So in a certain context, it's the tool you want. But in another context, I now need to go home and deal with the family. I better hit the sauna first. Otherwise, we're going to end up fighting, right?
Good. But give me the most important. I'm just about to do a presentation now, a huge presentation to a corporate investment bank. And I'm just about to get them to raise their hand on certain genes. You know, we had Dale Bredesen on the show talk about the end of Alzheimer's, how important that is. And he starts looking at ApoE status. What is there? You know, we can look at COMT. Everybody should know if you're, I think you're clear with COMT quickly or slowly. What are the big 5 ones for mood, emotions, anxiety? I mean, people are going to ask these questions now in terms of their genetics.
So the big 5 are dopamine, DRD2 is a gene, serotonin, which is mood regulation, and really your brain's ability to prioritize stimulus. So how irritable and distracted are you? Adrenal, which is your noradrenaline response, and how do you bind and perceive emotion? So do you hold on to emotion? Do you ignore it? Is your EQ high, low? Do you experience PTSD and trauma? Right? So that's the other big one. BDNF, which we just talked about, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and then COMT, because it clears your noradrenaline and your dopamine. There's some cofactors to all these. There's TPH, which is like tryptophan, MAO, which you mentioned. These are like supporting characters that pull things in either direction. But these big 5, even if I have just these 5 without the MAO, without the TPH, I can pretty much describe you to a T.
Sure.
Right. And this is I can do relationship counseling with these 5. Let's just say that.
Come on, Kashif. You're saying this goes everywhere into someone's career and what type of entrepreneur. You're not going to just tell me it's going to affect my sexual health in terms of how is that, do your genes affect in terms of how long you can sort of go at night, erectile dysfunction? I mean, is that something there? How many orgasms you can have? You know, I had Susan Bratton on my show. I know you got a podcast. I'm going to put the link into that. But I had the sex expert, Susan Bratton, talk about women that can have like 20 orgasms. Is that genetically sort of mediated?
So yeah, not all of it, but a lot of it. And so again, that's the exact way to use genetics, which is, here's the problem I'm trying to solve, which is optimal sexual health. How do I become a jackhammer, right? And then what are the systems that lead to that? So a big one, hormones. What do my hormones look like? Am I more androgenized? Do I have enough testosterone? Or am I more estrogenized, where I don't have the drive and I don't have the libido, right? Is in DHT, dihydrotestosterone, which is the manly, man-potent version, versus estrogens going into toxic byproducts, which can cause inflammation and reverse, right? Endothelium health, the actual hardware down there, right? The endothelium, I can't tell you how many men we're dealing with that post-jab and post-virus are having dysfunction. And they're not putting the two together. Because if you're taking something, whether it's the virus or the jab, that causes disruption to the endothelium, the inner lining of the blood vessel, and we can determine, by the way, genetically what quality of endothelium you have. Is it resilient stainless steel, or is it paper thin, highly prone to inflammation? Well, then, yeah, you're going to get dysfunction because there's blood flow into an endothelium there. And you're going to, if you have a toxic protein being embedded into it's not going to work. So you need detoxification. So that's another simple one. A big one is your brain, mood and behavior, because there's some people who are motivated differently, right? Some people are motivated by the act itself. Some people are motivated by a very specific version of the act, right? Which is why you have some people that have, call it fetishes, right? So if you take the opposite, the high dopamine expression with a very slow clearance, that person is more of a binger. So it's very easy for them to experience pleasure and reward. So they don't need satisfaction. They're just constantly satisfied. Everything's good. People might call them flaky, right? You have a meeting. It's like, here's the things we got to do. They're like, yeah, okay, sounds good. And then they go back on their video games or whatever. They leave their clothes everywhere and they're just because they don't have that drive about them. But when they find the thing that gives them that little bit of elevation of pleasure, they binge, they get stuck. So the addict, the opposite, the low dopamine is I need it every day on time and I structure my day around it. That's addiction. Binging is I don't need it, but when I get it, I'm gone for 8 hours. I'm lost. So now those two people looking at sexual health have a very different view of what they're even trying to achieve and what they're desiring from it, right? So again, we could spend in 1 hour just talking about
Yeah.
this.
No, I got
Any,
you.
yeah.
I think it's really important. We're going to go look at some of my clusters of genetics because I mean, I don't know, do you send genetic samples to South Africa or Africa, or how does it work if someone wants to sort of, go through the DNA company? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, we did have a challenge earlier, but we resolved that. We found a new. It just shipping human samples can be a problem sometimes.
Mm,
All I would advise is anyone wanting to do that. First of all, since you have a practice, we can set up with you. We should be doing that, right?
yeah,
And that way, people that are local can work with you.
yeah.
But if we work with you, easy. We'll set that up. Individuals, I would just suggest calling our office to make sure that the package is managed properly.
Okay.
South African customs can cause some delays sometimes.
Okay. Okay. So you've worked with South Africans before. You sort of know
Oh, for sure.
the
Yeah,
system. All right. So
yeah.
I'm going to jump quickly because I want to ask you some questions here, which are so interesting. Like, if you look at all four of my grandparents were diabetics, had significant issues. And when I looked at my genetics, and it's quite interesting, the insulin part that they sort of measured out, this company said was very low, and they looked at specific like a PPARG, a TCF7L2, and SLC2A2. So they had like 5 different genes. Do you look at more genes per sort of category, or how do you look at it? I mean, even oxidative stress, which was so they said I had no problems there, but I was quite overweight. I mean, talk about going from pain to pain to purpose. I was overweight. I went to medical school. I was in the physiology lab, and I just wasn't healthy at all. I was brought up very Greek, a lot of food. When you're sad, you ate. When you were happy, you were eating, and you couldn't leave the house until you cleared the plate. It was
Yeah.
my parents didn't have a lot growing up. So when they did have some sort of resources, we overate in that. But my genetics said I've got no problem with insulin, but I know that all 4 of my grandparents were diabetics. My parents are both diabetics. It just seems like that was an interesting one. So I'll ask you back to that question. But even if I look at the oxidative stress point of view, I do know this to be true, that oxidative stress and inflammation I struggle with. And under inflammation, that IL-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, then a whole bunch of ILs there, oxidative stress, they got eNOS, your superoxide dismutase, they got CAT and GPX1. Is this something very similar that you guys do?
So what we do, it goes back to what I said before, that there's 22,000 genes and we feel there's about 100 that matter, right? And so it's what you said, but we just look at a lot less. But from that less, we interpret a lot more. We know what it means. And this is where there's a gap where when you're trying to go big data, it's like, let's get a whole bunch of data and we'll try and the computers will tell us when it finds trends. Versus, why don't I just sit with you, a patient, and solve your problem? And when I actually solve it, I will know exactly what worked. And then I'll see that trend happening in another 5 or 10 or 100 patients. And there all of a sudden is an insight. That's now something that you can use, right? So that's the way we go about things. And so if I look at insulin resistance, yes, we look at TCF7L2. And the only other gene we look at is AMY1 because the other genes are, again, they're not the starring character, they're co-stars that pull things in a certain direction, but the bulk of it is done with these. So how do I metabolize starches and turn them into fuel? This hydrolysis of turning complex carbs into glucose, right? How efficiently do I do that? That's step 1. If I don't do that well, then I will get the carb crash. I'm not going to do well. That's going to be a load on my metabolic health. Second step is TCF7L2 and insulin response. How insulin resistant am I innately? And between these two, you can change somebody's life, right? Completely. You can prevent a lot and you can reverse a lot if you understand it. Now, the third gene you can also look at is ApoA2. ApoA2 is fat metabolism, saturated fat. And now this is what I mean by looking at less, but deriving more. We know that South Asian people, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, will have an insulin response from saturated fat, which nobody talks about.
Exactly.
Yeah, because of this gene, ApoA2. And all of the research we know is done on Western European white males for the most part. And so even the genetic insights come from there. And meanwhile, when we're trying to answer the question of insulin resistance, we are looking at less, but deriving more out of it, including these three genes. We know that we now need to look at fats also. If you eat too much fat, your body turns it into glucose anyway, right? And so we know it's going to become glucose. So just interpreting as per human biology as opposed to what does this gene mean and trying to figure out what
Okay.
drug
So you group it, but you've looked at so many tests that you now know, okay, insulin sensitivity is there. Same with oxidative stress and inflammation. I know. So when I looked at this, I realized more, I'm a runner, long distance runner. I've done sort of over 40,000 kilometers on the road. I haven't had any injuries at all in 28 years, but I struggle with inflammation and recovery. I struggle with oxidative stress. And so I started taking some more antioxidants. But out there, common knowledge is a lot of people are taking too many antioxidants and causing the blunting of it. But someone with my genetics, because I'll wake up after a hard run and, I'd feel that sort of inflamed feeling. I could, even in my beginning of my running career, I couldn't run every day. So I built up some, obviously, some resistance, or my diet got better, my sauna, 6 days a week in the sauna, whatever, lifestyle improved. But my recovery and my inflammation and oxidative stress was a lot higher than others. When you see this data, then you can take action. Is that the sort of clinical application?
Yeah, exactly. So dealing with oxidative stress, if you're only looking at the oxidative, it seems intuitive. I'm trying to fix inflammation rooted in oxidative stress. Let me go look at the oxidative stress genes, right? That seems like what you should do. But what we understand is the complete cascade of how your body deals with oxidative stress isn't just that step. It's also the clearance of the free radicals.
Okay.
Right. So you might have excellent antioxidant capacity, superoxide dismutase, like you said, and GPX, which is hydrogen peroxide. We only look at those two genes, by the way. We don't look at the rest because we know here's how the mitochondria functions, which is key. When I take oxygen as fuel and I turn that into an oxidant as a byproduct, which is a free radical that's a toxin and inflammatory, how efficiently does my fireplace have a chimney to get rid of that soot, right? Step one. Step two is that hydrogen peroxide, second step, if they're not aligned, then I'm not converting properly. And so it's even more of a problem. So now we know all we've discussed there is how efficiently I removed oxidation from the cell and deposited it in the blood. But now it's deposited in the blood. It hasn't exited yet.
Okay.
I now need to look at the glutathione pathway, GSTT1, which is this traffic cop that's in the blood looking for free radicals and looking for toxins to draw and send to the kidney to the liver to get rid of. And you could have the best combination, but the worst GSTT1, and you're not getting rid of all of the toxins you're depositing in the blood, which leads to inflammation.
Okay, so let me look at my GPX1 is a CT, and that was like significant. And then my superoxide dismutase was a CC, which is like high on that level. And then my GSTT1 was, I had an insertion. It said insertion, and it showed no sort of reaction. So those are the three genes that you would look at, and then you would draw some obviously some conclusions from that.
Yeah. So your antioxidant activity at the mitochondria is great, but your GPX needs to be the same rate. So it's kind of like you're doing a good job of shoveling the stuff, but the bag is too small, right?
Okay.
The GPX has to be the same CC. Even if you have a bad TT, if you have a TT GPX, it's better than them being misaligned because at least it's happening at the same pace and whatever you're clearing is being exited.
You see.
Right? So you have to think more functionally. And that's why I mean that geneticists think that this gene means this gene means this, but the body doesn't work that way. There's a system. And you have to look at the baton pass. This job, this job, this job. And if you don't understand the jobs first, the genes will only give you part of the story, right? So this is why you're dealing with inflammation, even though you were told you have the best SOD2 gene because your GPX is misaligned, and then your glutathione pathway is not functioning the best. So you need precursors to glutathione. You need NAC and glycine, milk thistle, selenium. to support that antioxidative activity.
Yeah, and that's what I've used, which has been helpful. And I can tell you something here is when I take a vitamin C, like I did 25 grams of vitamin C today, my REM sleep and my deep sleep just skyrocket. I'll get over 2 hours of both. It'll be
Yeah.
significant. Doesn't matter what type of day. If I get 25 grams of vitamin C
Yeah.
that day, my sleep dramatically improves. I mean, how does it work with you in terms of like when people align the application and the epigenetics to the genetics? Do they sleep? Do their numbers like REM sleep, deep sleep?
Yeah.
Does that improve significantly?
I would say so. Here's a funny thing is that we never intended to fix sleep
Mm,
because we learn you start with what's published genetically, and there isn't much published about sleep genes, right? At least not anything of value. But when we started working on those 7,000 people in our research, one of the first things that everybody said would get better is their sleep. And we're like, we didn't even work on your sleep. But what happened? Because bad sleep is rooted in everything else being bad. You're in an
yeah.
inflamed state, a poor detox state, your neurochemicals are not firing properly, you're not making serotonin properly, your gut is unhealthy. All of these systems that are during the day under stress cause you to fail at night during your sleep. So
Mm.
let me give you a simple example. We talked about serotonin, this mood regulator, right? So that's what it's typically known as. Is my mood appropriate for whatever's going on?
Now, how
Am
many
I over?
genes do you look at with serotonin? Sorry, Kashif.
Two. There's 5-HTT-LPR, which is the serotonin binding. So how long is the receptor? How much serotonin do I actually use? And then TPH which is a tryptophan gene, which is kind of like a co-star to that and takes it in a direction 10 or 20%, right? So now if your serotonin receptor is off and it's too short and you don't bind serotonin properly, you're not reacting as appropriate for the stimulus. Over or under, positive
Mm,
or negative, right? So you appear to have a bipolar type behavior, ADHD type behavior, distractibility, irritability, everything bugs you because your brain can't prioritize the stimulus. It doesn't know what to give attention to and how much
mm,
attention to give. And so it gives attention to everything. And when we're talking here, somebody walks by that I'm supposed to ignore, I can't ignore them. Somebody's chewing their food in a weird way, I can't help but say that's gross. Somebody's ticking their pen, it's like, please stop, I can't focus, right?
mm.
Whereas the other person in the room didn't even hear it. So
Okay.
that's serotonin and how it applies. So now in your sleep, the deep sleep you talked about typically happens in the first half, and the REM happens in the second half,
Yeah.
usually, right? So that second half, your body knows at some point I'm supposed to wake up. And the signal is meant to be sunlight. And there's a peachy glow when sunlight hits your eyelid, and that color truly signals the binding of serotonin to wake up and actually be fully awake and then start making cortisol. So if your serotonin response is broken and your brain can't prioritize stimulus, it doesn't know whether that was sunlight or was it just too hot or was it just too cold or did the hubby's foot touch your foot or did the
Mm,
dog fly a little too close? Like all of these stimuluses that somebody else is able to ignore, a serotonin dysregulated person can't. And now all of a sudden, this neurochemical thing that is only applied to mood also breaks or fixes your sleep. And so when we were fixing somebody's mood, we unintentionally fixed their sleep,
sure.
right? And there's so many examples I could give you of other things that disrupt sleep that when we fixed because of some other reason, somebody had eczema or headaches or whatever, they said, "Well, I'm sleeping amazing now," and it was, and now we learn how all these systems are interconnected.
Cool. So let me ask you the most important question, I think, of the whole podcast. Should everyone test their genes?
So now that I've done it for me, my niece, my mother, etc., and we have a business around it. So I obviously have a very strong bias. Big disclaimer, right?
What's the genetic that code? What's the genetic snip that codes for that bias?
The which, sorry,
What's the genetic sort of snip that codes for that bias?
the SNP is my reward-seeking behavior, the warrior mentality. Everyone needs a genetic test. Now we'll go
Yeah.
door to door and deliver them. So so my belief is now that I've done it,
Yeah.
I've done my kids from 6, 7, and 14 years old because I believe having the instruction manual, I have an instruction manual for my microwave, and I don't have one for something as complex as the human body and the decisions that I have to make every single day. And I understand the thinking around, well, I don't really need to know my disease risk because I'm healthy, right? And that's what we used to think genetics was: cancer risk, Alzheimer's. But it's so much more. It's every decision you're making. Should I be a vegan? Do I actually make the enzymes to break down beans and lentils, etc.? You know, what sport should my child play? What are they when they're 5 years old? I don't know what they're going to look like when they're 15. But if I have their hormone genetics, I actually do. I can predict exactly what they're going to look like. Are they going to be big and bulky and burly, or more wiry and thin? Should they be a sprinter? Should they be a football player? We know all that already. So every day everything you do is a choice towards health or a choice away from it. Whatever you breathe, whatever you eat, what relationships you have, the outcome is different for each one of us because of our unique genetics and what we can tolerate and what we can't. Right? The same problem that's a problem for somebody is not a problem for me. So knowing exactly what to prioritize, knowing how to always make the right choice, that can only equal additional years of life, right? Health span, like living to 90, riding your bicycle, as opposed to 65, getting treated for some cardiovascular disease. And so I believe it's a foundational thing, because anyone that's listening, first of all, you probably already enjoy your supplements and your therapies and all the recommendations. So even all of what you're already doing can be personalized more. Maybe you're spending a few $100s a month on supplements, can be brought down to 80. Or maybe you're doing all these biohacks and all these things, and there's only half of them that you actually need, and the other half might actually be making you sick and you didn't know. Right?
That's
So
powerful.
it's just it's a decision making tool that drives everything decision you make in the future.
Let me ask you this next question. It's just in terms of lifestyle, and obviously we know epigenetics, the manifestations of genes and that, and how they sort of manifest. What about the fact that if you put, the genes in a compromised way with regards to your nutrition, your sleep, your exercise, but they will only express certain genes and they won't express significant sort of SNPs in certain areas? Because and this is where you say the geneticist is saying, oh, you got a SNP here, you got a problem with that. Maybe you want to just explain what a SNP is, but it really never manifests. And maybe you want to take the cancer, the BRCA gene, and sort of, explain it through that. Because I just find that sometimes, oh, you got this SNP. Well, you definitely going to get this. If you have a bad lifestyle, you will get this. But it sometimes doesn't really work like that.
Yeah. So I'll go through the BRCA example, and just to answer your question, this is the whole point: is to know what your epigenetic habit should be, and to know that if I eat this or exercise like this is the outcome for me, because this is how it changes my genetic expression. So you're right, and everybody knows that that's true. My lifestyle choices drive my outcome, but they still don't know what the right lifestyle choice is for them, because they don't understand what genes are not functioning properly. So you, again, prioritize. Here's the gene that for me makes too much estrogen, CYP19A1. I convert all my testosterone to estrogen. So for a man, that means man boobs, lack of libido, right? For a woman, that means fibromyalgia, potentially weight gain, etc. So change the expression of that gene. And we already know what foods and supplements do that. And it's about prioritizing it. It is absolutely true. A woman that drinks a green smoothie full of, dim on one day will have a very different hormone test result than when she did it next week without that dim, without that smoothie, because it changed the gene expression. The food she ate slowed down that estrogen dominance. So you're going to see a different result. So but nobody knows what to do. When we're saying you can know what to do, it's made much easier now. So going to BRCA. So BRCA is this, there was an article in CNN on the news in the United States about a month ago saying that cancer rates are down because of miracles like BRCA, where they're now telling young women to cut their fallopian tubes out so they don't get ovarian cancer. And the funny thing is, when you're reading an online article, it usually recommends the next article you should read based on the content. Well, I just read this article that said cancer rates are down because we're cutting fallopian tubes out. The recommended article was cancer rates in women are going through the roof and we don't know what's happening. Right? So completely contradicting themselves.
Crazy.
It's just this siloed information. Breast cancer rates, by the way. So the US military put out a report saying that in service women, so young service women in the military, there's been a 478% increase in breast cancer in the last 2 years.
478% in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
It's
And we're
almost
talking about
unbelievable.
young, and this is military, which is one of the most respected health databases in the world. And it's where a lot of other people go to do their research and learn from. And I think we can, again, spend an hour just talking about why.
Yeah.
But we know what's going on there. There's immune compromisation, and so all of a sudden people are getting sick. So let's look at BRCA. You're told, cut your breasts off, cut your fallopian tubes out, because you have this elevated risk of cancer because the gene doesn't work. BRCA doesn't cause breast cancer. Most doctors still believe this is true. And again, this is what they're told, so they believe it's true. BRCA is a tumor suppressor. So God forbid you have cancer, it's supposed to fix it. And if you have a bad repair tool, you don't do a good job of fixing, which means you're more likely to not survive. But you still didn't answer the question, why did I get the cancer to begin with?
Yeah.
What happened? Right? So the majority of breast cancer happens around menopause age, right? Not all of it, but a lot of it. And what's happening is some women do have the fast CYP19A1 gene that I was talking about, where they make way too much estrogen. And some women do make a toxic version. So before you have your menstrual cycle, you first convert that estrogen into a metabolite. The three options, 2, 4, or 16 hydroxyestrogen, they're called. 2 is good, clean stuff. 4 and 16 are toxic, right? They cause inflammation. Step 3 of 3, how well do you detoxify that toxin? Detox through glutathione, antioxidation, COMT, the same stuff we've been talking about. So single genes don't have a single purpose. They do many jobs in your body.
Of course.
Right? Yeah. So now, if you are that woman that's estrogen dominant, estrogen toxic, doesn't detoxify well, then you're making month over month this inflammatory insult in your body. And now you get into menopause. You no longer have a menstrual cycle, so you're not getting rid of it. There's nowhere for it to go. And your body's like, wait a second, this stuff's a threat. I'm going to do something smart and keep it away from the organs, keep it away from the vasculature and the veins. I'm going to go deposit it in fat. And then all of a sudden, where do women have fat? In their breasts. Yeah. And then you have this inflammatory insult being deposited there, causing inflammation to the ducts and glands that the cellular structure was not designed. Like your lungs and your gut were designed for toxins.
Yeah.
This wasn't. So you wonder why cells degrade, mutated, get cancer, and your immune system's compromised, et cetera, et cetera. So there's your why. There's many whys, by the way, but there's one example of a why. Now, if I take a 5-year-old girl and run her genetics, I already know this. I already know that this girl should not be taking the birth control pill for 10 or 15 years, loading that estrogen and firing that estrogen toxicity. This girl should not be using Teflon coating frying pans and pesticides in her lawn and chemical dry cleaning, because those are all estrogen mimics that load up that estrogen pot and make more estrogen toxicity, right? When she goes on to hormone replacement therapy, as she gets into menopause, which is so popular these days, she has to be very specific about where to intervene. She can't take, for example, estradiol, because estradiol converts into 4-hydroxy, the toxic stuff, right? So now you can, to your point, as opposed to BRCA says 60% chance of breast cancer, go cut your breasts off, right? Versus here's exactly the epigenetic choices you should have, environment, nutrition, and lifestyle, which are the reasons why you get sick.
Yeah.
So if you remove these and add these instead, add some supplements to help you, remove some bad news, it should not happen. It's caused, and we know why it's caused. And this cascade, you name a chronic disease from autism to hair loss to weight gain to whatever, there's 3, 4, 5 examples for each that we can speak to in this way.
Sure. Very, very powerful. I think we're going to cut that for sure and share that on socials, because I think what you've just explained now so well and so succinctly is fundamentally important for anyone who's had any history of cancer in their family. I mean, 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women will get cancer. Those are the latest stats. It's probably increasing with those numbers. So I think it's crucially important. I think you've answered the question. If you've got the resources or you want to save for the resources, then testing your genetics is very, very important, especially because we're losing the war against chronic disease like never before. I've been in practice 24 years. I've never seen people get so sick so quickly and to such a large degree. So, I really want to honor you, your calling, your purpose. I want you to tell us about the DNA company, how people can connect with you on social media. You've got a brilliant Instagram account. Well done to you on those reels. I just love your reel. I just love watching you, hearing you, and what you're doing. And I know you've gone and you've really done the due diligence on this, and hopefully we can connect after the show, because I really want to see how I can partner with you, listen to you on Tom Bilyeu, on Ben Greenfield. You've really gone out there, the Gundry podcast, the Forward by Dave Asprey. those people listening out there and those that watch on YouTube, we've got a real health hero on our hands here. And he's the real deal. He's doing it in real life with real people. He's written books. And so I can't salute him any more than I have. But thank you. So just tell us where people can connect with you.
No, thank you for your kind words. For me, it's just like, it's why I wake up every day and it doesn't end until I sleep, right? So,
Yeah.
and yeah, so Instagram is a fun place to be, where I started just venting, and everything that I see in clinical practice is just so like, slap myself. I just talk about it because it's these things that people are treating symptomatically are so easy to resolve if you understand the root cause,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we share daily on not my full name, but KashKhan official, Cash Khan official. Go there and be entertained, but learn at the same time.
Brilliant.
If you're woke, you might not like it. I'll just straight out disclaimer.
Go and check it out. It's cool.
And then in terms of the testing, it's at the DNAcompany.com. But I want to honor everybody's time here today. So I'm just thinking, anyone that's listening to the podcast, let's add a promo code on there. I actually didn't do anything. I'm just kind of making it up on the fly.
Cool.
So maybe Thrive will make it,
Yeah. Brilliant.
So go to the DNAcompany.com/Thrive.
Yeah.
And there'll be a discount at checkout. I'll make sure that gets set up as soon as I get off this.
Brilliant.
And the last is, if you just want to learn more, it's the DNAway.com is where the book is. It's in stores everywhere. I'm not sure if it's in South Africa, but you can get it through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the booksellers. We had a amazing story there where one of our patients and customers was the CEO of this publishing company. And he was so touched by what we did. He said, "You got to tell the story," and and for me at that exact same time, I was thinking, my niece just healed. How do I tell the story so everybody knows? And things just kind of happened, right? And we wrote the book. So it came out last month. People are loving it. So yeah, the DNAway.com if you want to learn more about the book. And there's a free chapter there, by the way, if you just want to peek at it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kashif. We just want to just declare favor and blessing over you, strength, that you would continue to live out your purpose, your calling, your why. You got zeal, you got zest. You're very compassionate. I can see that you really care. And that's all we need in this world. We need real, authentic, integrous men and women to change this world, because I said to my wife the other day, I said, I've never needed the psychologist. I'm not embarrassed about it, going to see a counselor, psychologist than ever before, just because of the amount of chronic disease that we're seeing. I just want to thank you again, and just lots of love your way, and just really grateful for your calling.
Pleasure, man. Honor to be here.